The environment that my father grew up in was very much that.
Wow. It was just kind of built into them.
It was patriotic to
Wow.
push through and sacrifice.
Yeah. And I like that it says coping styles. So some of the ways it says they dealt with disappointment was, of course, suppression. We already talked about that. And productivity, that with the wars and the things, everybody had to work. But it also says prayer and religion were a big part of that. So it was probably, I think back then, it was probably just not, it was just unspoken that we went to church, right? The family went to church. It's just what you did. No questions asked. All right, so let's move into the baby boomers. James, do you want to read some of those for the baby boomers?
Yes, since I'm kind of right there on the cusp, sure. Some of the traits of baby boomers were they're very optimistic. Now, these were people born between basically 1946 and 1964. They're optimistic, they're competitive, and they're very achievement oriented. And oftentimes their response to disappointments would include taking setbacks personally, but responding with a drive to overcome them, which I think is interesting. And then also this generation equated their own self-worth with their own success. Mm-hmm. So if they weren't very successful, they typically had a low self-worth and vice versa. Yeah. And that led to a deep impact from failure. But they also had a tendency to keep calm and carry on, as the saying goes right now. But they sometimes had a little underlying bitterness with that as well. And how they coped with disappointment was they worked harder. And here's a big one. They compartmentalized, which I think we're probably going to talk about. And then they used traditional advice they were given, like, you know what, just keep your chin up and keep trudging forward and it'll all work out. So that's kind of how they did. And like I said, I can see some of that in me. I can see some of that in a lot of the friends that I grew up with. It was, you dealt with it, you sucked it up, and you moved forward.
Yeah. And a lot of us, well, I know especially Gen X a lot of us were raised by this generation. And so that was a lot of, we'll get into some of the reasons why we probably are the way we are. But where do you see on there that they talked about their disappointments?
You didn't.
Exactly.
You compartmentalized it.
Yeah.
Right.
You put it in a little box.
Mm-hmm. You put it in a box, you put the lid on the box, you shove the box in like a really dark recess of your mind, never to be opened again.
Until it exploded later.
Carrie, I want to hear from you because you officially are in this generation. How did you see handling disappointments? I mean, how do you see that this type of thing has helped you or harmed you in handling disappointments?
So I would say earlier in my life, this was me to a T. I mean, almost every single thing on here. I felt my worth was directly related to, finishing college, what kind of degree I got, what very traditional societal things that say you are successful. And to the point, it was my identity. And dealing with disappointment, I really just didn't, honestly. I just didn't. I just kind of, I might get hurt, but then I just kind of shoved it back and just moved on.
Mm-hmm. Chin up.
Yes, and did work, just would work harder, harder and harder, very disciplined. Those things turned out not to work very well for me long term, but as God worked with me, He definitely did a lot with that. But I would say both my brother and I, very much so. He didn't have a degree, but a self-made millionaire, and it's all about what you can do. Mm-hmm. And yep.
And I can see a lot of this, especially in you. I've known you for a long time, and I can see a lot of this. Basically, keep calm and carry on. You're like, you're fine. I've heard you say that several times, but you're okay, you're fine. And, I can see this actually in my parents who are boomers, because it was and I know you can attest to this personally, it's if you don't stop crying, I'm gonna give you something to cry about.
Yes.
That was a common thing. It was, wait, I'm already crying and you're going to give me something else to cry about? It didn't make
it's something real to cry about, I think was what they were saying.
Yeah, suck up your feelings. Don't, disappointments, we just We push them aside, we chin up, we power on, right? So that's a big deal because I can see a lot of that in the generations, even working with people that are in that generation. I have seen a lot of this, especially even when I did EMS. I remember seeing a lot of that in this generation. You're like, somebody just died or something happened. Do you want to talk about this? They're like, no, I'm fine. And it was almost like they didn't care. To me, in a different generation, I thought, well, man, they don't even have feelings. But it wasn't that they didn't have feelings. I think the way they dealt with disappointment and loss was exactly this. It was the chin up, we're moving on. And if you think about it, they were mainly raised by the silent generation who was just trying to survive, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me. If you're working with somebody in this generation, why maybe if you're dealing with loss or grief or anything that has to do with a disappointment, why they respond the way they do. It doesn't mean they're not feeling or caring. It's just the way their generation processed. And honestly, that's why we're doing this, because that's what we need to see. Instead of misjudging them, right? We need to realize that that's their culture for their generation.
So this is kind of what you can expect. You may have to give them a little longer or dig a little deeper for them to
Well,
be.
and you also have to deal with the fact that they feel like you're intruding.
Yeah.
And so they're very defensive.
Yeah.
They can get very defensive very quickly when they feel like you're intruding. And I think I've seen that in that generation with my parent. It's just you're wanting to talk about some trauma and immediately their walls are up and they're lashing out and you're like, I'm just trying to help. They're like, we're not
True.
discussing feelings.
Very true.
So,
Right.
there is a way to approach them because it is something that they bury deep, and getting to that layer takes some skill.
That's good.
Well, and even I noticed with myself when my dad passed away, 10 years ago now, everybody kept asking me, do you want to talk? Are you okay? And my response was always, I'm fine. So to anybody watching this, if you come across somebody from this generation that's experienced a loss or a trauma and they say, I'm fine, they're not. But you have to have the patience to wait for them to come to you and they'll just start talking about it. With no solicitation or anything. They'll just start talking about it. But if you try to force them or draw it out of them, man, it's going to get so filed back in their mind even further that they're going to completely shut down and
isolate.
And may never talk about it ever again if you push too hard. So be real careful.
That's good advice. Yeah.
So I noticed that a lot of these first two, the silent and the baby boomers, almost come from a place of just survival mode.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
For sure.
That's true.
Yes. So awesome. Well, let's move to Gen X, and this is 1965 to 1980, and there's several of us Gen Xers here. So, and I think as I was reading this, what I started to realize is you can see why each generation built the traits that they had. Gen X is, we're actually known as the forgotten generation because people a lot of times just skip us. They say you got the Gen Z, you got the millennials and the boomers. And it's like, well, what about us? That's like a whole generation that's not there because people just don't know what to do with us.
There's also not many of us. We're a rather small generation.
We are, yeah. But small but mighty, I would like to. So, and one of the traits now this is concerning disappointments, is independence, to be skeptical. Yes, yes, and yes. And resourceful. And I have to say for myself, we were like the original latchkey kids. Our parents were working, or either we had single parent households. And so a lot of times we were very resourceful and independent because we had to be. We came home to, cartoons or MTV or whatever. And we kind of raised ourselves in a lot of ways because parents had to work. They had to provide.
We also drank from the garden hose.
Yes, we drank from garden hoses.
And we're here.
And we didn't come home until the street lights came on. And our parents usually didn't know where we were because it was a safer place where you just hung out in the neighborhoods. If you wanted to find your friends, you looked for the pile of bicycles. Yep. And that was just kind of the way it was. I would like to say it was the best of times. So kids, go outside. This is very important. It's important to play outside. But so now as far as dealing with disappointment though, we also, you got to think, our parents were baby boomers usually, and some of them were even from the silent generation. And so we learned how to handle disappointments from them and from of course, from our peers, right? And so we kind of just had to figure it out. We were in this, and so we grew up in a time, it says here, with rising divorce rates and economic uncertainty. Well, I think it's been that way for quite a while, but the rising divorce rates, it was like, if you think about it, this was most of our parents, or at least my parents, for the ones that are a little bit younger, Gen X, our parents were the hippies. Right? Yep. So it was a lot of, we grew up very different than the generation prior. And so there was, I say, rising divorce rates. There was also instant single parent homes, right? And so we learned how to deal with disappointment by being resourceful. Like I said, we just pushed through and did what we had to do. But I think there was probably a lot of rebellion in our generation that started with the hippie generation, though. And the hippie generation, you guys started it. But we took it and we kind of ran with it in a different way. We kind of went the way of the grunge and different things, but heavy metal or whatever. But I think a lot of us dealt with disappointment through things like that, through music and just a different. What do you guys think, my Gen X peers?
I'll jump in. So I remember growing up that my parents were very good at giving me information and space to apply it however I thought that I should apply it. And then if it went bad, then there would be, the follow-up and correction. But really it was, here's some information. How do you think you should handle it? And if you do it wrong, we'll talk later. But it was really a step back, and it wasn't the face-to-face working through disappointment, giving us skills. Their method was to teach and to give space and see what I came back with.